ENVO is the environment ontology. It fulfills a particular niche in the semantic web, I hope, where we'd be able to populate some of these fields that Joel was talking about. So Darwin Core can exist in its own world, and ENVO can exist in its own world as well. So it's kind of, we started off with a very pragmatic aim, which was just to build a bunch of terms which people could annotate their data when they were collecting their samples, when they were collecting data in the field. Whilst we were building it, we also came up with a sister ontology, which is actually a gazetteer based on ontological principles called GAZ. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I don't have direct involvement in that, although we're trying we've gone our separate ways a bit, and now we're trying to come back again and see if we can capitalize on each other's activities as we move forward. I'll tell you, I'll try to explain a little bit as I go forward in the talk about why we took those separate routes and are going to come back again later. So I thought because we've been philosophizing a lot and things like that, I thought I'd have just a little bit of a lighter side to remind ourselves about what environments are. So this is just off the coast of the UK. This is an image that you can actually see. This is not enhanced in any way. It's a satellite image that you can see from space. These are these little creatures, which are called coccolithophores. They die en masse and create these calcium-type blooms, which you can see from space. They get infected by a tiny virus, which is even inside of them, and these are the fellas that form like the White Cliffs of Dover and things like that. So just an interesting thing that I find interesting when you're thinking about the scales that you're working upon, and when talking about environments, which you could be, along on the Serengeti, or from a particular organism. You've got lots of orifices where microbes and things like that could live in along the whole length of the organism as well. So particularly I work with a lot of people that work in molecular microbiology, and us as individuals, as human beings, we're outnumbered 10 to 1 by microbes, and the average human being has about 1.5 kilograms of microbes in and on them at any one time. So when you do take antibiotics and you lose a little bit of weight, half of that is microbes leaving you for a little while and then and repopulating you. We've been enjoying some other types of microbial environments as well whilst we've been here for a couple of days. And of course, this is the other kind of samples which we're trying to describe. I was recently, last week, just came back from a trip to Gothenburg University and got to go through the catacombs of samples which they keep there as well. I'm sure to many of you this kind of scene will be very, very familiar. Barry's also explained a little bit about where the environment ontology fits within the Obo Foundry scheme of things, and of course we can see that it spans the granularity from molecules right up to animals, large animals roaming on plains like the Serengeti as well, which I just showed earlier. There's the capture of environmental data as well is getting much more sophisticated, and we're starting to capture gigabytes, if not petabytes, of data about environmental parameters with long-term ecological research stations, things like that, where you're making all these kind of observations and you're getting lots and lots of information associated with these environmental samples. So it's kind of important that we establish a good framework now to be able to do so. Of course, you've got the more traditional environmental approaches where you're going out into the field, taking a sample. It could be a bucket of soil or something like that, and wanting to attach parameters to that. So we worked a little bit with the, we came from the Genomic Standards Consortium point of view, and we've worked a lot to develop a series of reporting requirements or standard checklists called MIXS, which is MIXS, which stands for minimum information about any kind of sequence. This was because there was a long history of developing minimum information about a genomic sequence, about a metagenomic sequence, about a marker gene sequences. But they all had in common capturing information such as the environmental biome, the environmental feature, the environmental material. These are all part of an environmental package, and things like the geographic location, so the X, Y, Z, and T, if you like. So exactly where you got it and what time you captured these kind of things. This sort of made us work with other groups as well, where we've been working with a group in London. David Arnenson, he's developed a smartphone application called EpiCollect, which you can take out into the field and capture just these kind of information on your mobile phone. So when you're in the field, you can specify with an XML format these kind of reporting requirement information which we've had, which could be in Darwin Core, it could be in the GSC reporting requirements, and these get populated and uploaded directly to a server, and you can cache them on your phone and upload them when you get into an area where you've got Wi-Fi connectivity, and then they get populated onto a map so you can see where they are. You can do all the usual drawing of areas where you can select data and refine it based on various parameters. Okay, that was just, again, as a little aside. The environment ontology project began back in ISMB in Vienna, where I sat down in a coffee shop with Michael Ashburner for a while, and Michael had obviously been doing a lot of work on the gene ontology, and he said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we sort of started doing an ontology for environments as well, because this was a strong interest of his. So we did some hungry term capture. We went out to lots of different data resources that captured information about habitats. In fact, the environment ontology was called the habitat ontology to begin with, but for various reasons we've chosen to call it the environment ontology. Partly that was due to a bit of confusion in terms of habitat being the canonical environment, if you like, about where you would usually expect to find a class of species. So that promotes a kind of a lot of confusion when you're asking people to capture environmental information about an instance or an individual organism when you're in the field, because you might tend to express the habitat of a particular species or organism as something like, if you're describing penguins, you would say maybe the habitat of the penguin is Antarctic ice shelves, whereas that particular penguin that you were recording information about might actually be located in Chester Zoo, just outside Manchester in the UK. So that was the reason for that. So I'm going to switch to Pierre's slides for a moment. Okay. And Pierre, feel free to chime in here if you want to. These are the top level terms.
From my box.
So, what did he say?
Hello, box. From
his box, yeah.
Greetings.
This is Pierre. This is what he looks like normally. The top level terms, as Barry's printed out on the sheet, that currently we have in the environment ontology are biome, environmental feature, and environmental material. So as I said, Pierre's slides are much nicer than mine. So you can describe things like the environmental biome, which in this instance, if you were describing it in relation to this particular killer whale here, the marine epipelagic biome, you might want to refine it as well a little bit more down to things like the marine neritic epipelagic biome. And these are terms which you can find now in ENVO, thanks to Pierre's adding terms. So I'll talk a little bit about how you can add terms later on as well. So these are terms that you would find at the biome level. You would also, traversing down one of the other separate top-level branches, find terms which are under the feature level of ENVO as well, where you'd have descriptors such as marine subtidal rocky reef. These are terms which don't exist. They exist orthogonally to the biome terms which we describe. Then there's other terms as well, which would be the material level terms, which in this instance would be coastal water. These are all count noun style terms, which are under the material, environmental material branch. This is things that you can, generally speaking, have portions of. So you can have a portion of coastal water, or a bucket full of coastal water, a bucket full of soil, a piece of butter, something like that. This is the sort of the general rule of thumb that we've chosen to capture all these types of terms. Why do we have it? Because when you have described these particular samples or specimens that are taken from environmental niches and you try to contextualize them, it's often important to be able to describe the environmental substance that they displace in order to exist. So if I was to be sampled all of a sudden, somebody uprooted me, I might just say that my environmental material was air, which is currently surrounding me. That would be an appropriate descriptor for at that time of sampling. Okay, so then when you build it all up, if you were to just literally manage to lift this killer whale out of its environment exactly where it was at that particular time and place, you could build up a description of it as marine neritic epipelagic biome, which would come from, again, that top level branch, marine subtidal rocky reef and coastal water. These are aligned, there's been some work with Barry and Pierre about doing more rigorous alignment to the basic formal ontology. When we originally started building the environment ontology back in 2007, we were sort of in a mid-place between, I think Barry described earlier on about people retrofitting to the basic formal ontology and people who built it on those basic formal ontology principles, their ontologies right from the start. We were kind of somewhere in the middle where we've sort of we were aware of it, but we've started doing the retrofitting now. So I'll let Barry talk a little bit more about this later on, but essentially it falls under site and material entity, where we have biome, habitat, or niches, different types of ecosystems under environmental system. We've got this notion as well of organisms, populations, and community, which are beginning to creep in too. This is, the Horridge Life Zone climate classification, which many of you are probably quite familiar with. Again, it just sort of helps to build this multi-dimensional understanding of how parameters shape our understanding and descriptions of niche. I won't talk too much about these, but suffice it to say that under biome you can start traversing down these branches and find more and more refined different levels of terms, and we've tried to be rigorous about how those terms have been described.
Can you go back a couple of slides?
Yeah.
So
this one?
Yeah. Why is marine pelagic biome not a child of ocean biome? For instance.
When I'm putting this together, a lot of these terms were created de novo, but some of them existed already, such as ocean biome. In a way, it's a bit it's a legacy term, and in a sense, it's kind of operating at a different level of granularity. You would say that the marine pelagic biome is sort of part of the ocean biome,
right,
rather than it's still not clear entirely. And
okay, good.
In fact,
that's enough.
A lot of it will have to be left that way until we get the top level totally solidified, and then from there we can distinguish the rules, and then the relationships would be more clear.
Good.
So this is where, I see a lot of cool stuff that's meaningful to me and the people I work with. But what you just point out, Barry, I think, why is an ocean biome equivalent to marine biome? And do they have, a formal way of expressing equivalence? And then with those remaining, whatever classes, are they disjoint? Are some of those disjoint, but others potentially you can append multiple tags to some sort of a data item to describe that, well, this is a marine, in a marine benthic biome, and it is in a marine pelagic biome. And is that allowed or not? What sort of logical expressivity do you have?
So I think that the advantage of this approach is that you can not just raise questions like that, but you can raise and discuss intelligently what the best solutions will be. Now, I know what the best solutions are in each case, I think, but it's very hard to achieve those best solutions in messy domains like this, precisely because of the overlaps and
the domain experts probably know best what's the most useful.
Precisely, which is why I don't mess with marine biome.
When we use this, a lot of the terms that we came up with here perform formulated in conjunction with ICOM, the International Census of Marine Microbes, in a sort of practical application sense. We wanted terms that they could use, and then this would go into ENVO, and now it's a stage where we're pruning back in order for it to be more coherent from a logical perspective. Now, if you have this entity that's somehow in both the marine benthic biome and the marine pelagic biome, this is where kind of the annotators, the domain experts, you have to make a call. You have to make some sort of judgment call here. Is the ecosystemic influence of the benthic biome the defining ecosystemic influence here, or is it the pelagic biome? It's a hard call, but in the end, I mean, it may be. In some cases, it's not. But that's somehow you have to make that distinguishing factor. At least from my point of view, that's how I see it. I don't know.
And the other thing is, as well, in sort of in general terms, what Pierre and yourself are highlighting here is that we're just trying to help as a focal point for lots of different types of communities to come and contribute to something which could be a shared resource for many people. So we would see that these kind of more branches or leaves of the tree, we don't really understand how they fit together, and we don't claim to, but we would very much like communities to get together and say, you know, describe all the different types of soil types and what are equivalent types of soil types and things like that. Describe all the marine types of environments and what are equivalent types of marine environments.
Process that could facilitate that?
We wish we had a better one, but at the moment it's just about, you know, getting together on emails and Skype talks and things like that. But
I'll describe the process, the top level in the afternoon session.
I mean, for example, we've had there's another project called One Geology, and the British Geological Society has come to us as well and said, you know, can we put all different geological rock types in there, because we work, they're doing sort of this geological map of the world, and it'd be nice if they had that within an ontological framework. And of course, geological types are environments as well to very many creatures. Again, another aspect of this is we've tried to be as species agnostic, if you like, about the way we've described these environments. So if you're a woodworm living in a table, that table, or, you know, your environmental material would be wood, the environmental feature would be table, and it's not for us to decide whether or not it's a particular food type or something like that, because as human beings we wouldn't eat it or something like that.
Yeah, so when I look at this in OboEdit, I get a lot richer view of the contents of this than in the OWL export. Has that been rectified so that you're going to have sort of greater comparability between the OWL export of the OBO ontologies as opposed to using the native OBO?
It's a long story.
Yeah.
Long story. But the ENVO itself has been developed at the lower levels more rapidly than we had clarity at the upper levels. And we are just about at the point where we've got those two efforts in sync with each other. And then we have the additional complexity involved in the fact that we're moving, I take it this is generally agreed, that we're moving slowly but surely from an OBO development environment to an OWL development environment. And so that aspect of synchronization will come with the same package. But it's two processes, both of which need to be brought into sync with each other and internally.
Could you tell us a time frame for that?
Norman?
Of getting the things in sync, I think we should manage it within the next 2-3 months.
So there will be at some stage a new official release of ENVO, which will be coincident with an initial request that ENVO be accepted as a full member of the OBO Foundry, which means a review. So one part of our process is that to become a full member of the OBO Foundry, you have to be reviewed by domain experts and by ontology experts.
Barry, can I ask a naive question? Could you go back, Lawrence? How, from your point of view, do you deal with the fact that benthic and pelagic are orthogonal to the freshwater marine distinction, not a clean subset of marine? In other words, you can have freshwater benthic and freshwater pelagic as well.
So there's a lot of redundancy because it's...
Well, it's not redundancy, they're orthogonal.
Yeah, that's just...
One's not a subset of the other. It's a different way of looking at an aquatic environment.
That's just one of those pains in the neck that will always be a pain in the neck. So can you open... Oh, no, you can't open. It's a slide. But under freshwater biome, we will include, if we haven't done so already, freshwater benthic and freshwater pelagic biome.
I mean, for me, like we're from the Marine Microbiology Institute here in Bremen, and freshwater is a sort of problematic term for us because in a geographic sense, and we want to synchronize also with the geographic vocabularies, marine you can sort of group together. Freshwater is problematic because it includes a lot of stuff like lakes or rivers, etc. I would prefer things like lacustrine, for example, describing lake systems, and fluvial or something of that kind, describing river systems. They tend to be more informative and, again, less dependent on the actual material level of it, the water, but more on the ecosystemic level. Is it flowing water? Is it a stationary body of water, etc.? So yeah, there's a debate on those terms, but we look for consensus. The idea, like when we had this chance with ICOM to have the debate with domain experts, fight it out a little bit, and then arrive at something stable, that's exactly how I think ENVO will grow. We take in what we think is the shared conceptualization from reviews or common, for example, the UN soil classification system, and then we let the domain experts refine this and say, oh no, this is not used, and it's a sort of living ontology in that way.
When you're coming up with these terms and you're building this hierarchy, how important is it when you come up with subsets that they be mutually exclusive and exhaustive, or not? Or is it okay if they're overlapping and not exhaustive? Just like the issue here. I don't like freshwater because it's confounding lakes and rivers and creeks and swamps and that sort of thing. So is it really important to have a nice, clean, separated set of categories? Or
the same rules don't apply every time when you're applying it to different environments, I think is the short answer, because, well, we could go on ad nauseum in terms of building up these big long strings.
For example, benthic and pelagic are subsets of marine, but you don't have pelagic in a mangrove biome. So, or in a salt marsh probably, the shallow salt marsh. So these terms don't seem to be either a hierarchy or parallel exhaustive categories. They just seem to be a series of ad hoc bags. And I guess that's the way to start, but how do you resolve ad hoc bags into a more structured?
The answer to your question is we seek mutually disjoint wherever we can. We even seek jointly exhaustive, but our hope of jointly exhaustive classifications is very, very weak in most domains. So maybe we can do it for quarks, but not for much else. Even chemical elements, it's hard to be exhaustive. But you have to have principles. So the principle is you're aiming for jointly exhaustive, mutually disjoint classifications at every level of the hierarchy. But time is short, money is short, people have urgent needs for terms for annotations, and so you create versions, and each version should be better than the previous version. And you're quite right to criticize this version, but you would be even righter if you would commit 3 hours a week for the next year to fix the bits.
But again, the fact that benthic and pelagic are orthogonal to the other distinctions. So do you have orthogonal classifications and then deal with intersections, or do you force them into a single hierarchy?
No, we can solve all your problems. So these are problems which ought to be solved and which gradually will be solved, but we can't solve them all at once for reasons.
If you version marine biome by what it contains, if you add something, do you have to have a new version of marine biome?
Generally speaking, the whole ontology is published in a new release version every 6 months, or once we get. So that's the way the gene ontology is done. So there's a working release every night which contains very small revisions, but the public release is every 6 months.
We would normally give a new definition to the marine biome if one of its children was updated, but only we would give a new UE to marine biome if we change the definition of marine biome in some
Don't
way.
put if one of his children are updated, but what if a new child is added? Is that considered sufficiently?
If it doesn't change the definition of marine biome, then there's no reason to change the marine biome.
Okay,
If you
but by
find something
adding a
that
new
should
child, you implicitly change the definition of marine biome to include a child that was previously excluded.
that child may have been excluded, it may have matched the exact definition, but been excluded simply because you didn't think to put it there.
So
there's
marine
lots of
biome
ways
is
to
not,
do it.
I mean, the definitions are not extensional, you know, basically, right? So
Okay.
It's not by the list of
By the
children.
list, yes, next section. Okay.
Can I ask how you imagine that it might be used?
I can show you an example of how it might be used, actually. Good question. Yeah. I will show you an example of how it might be used.
The reason I ask is that, you know, we would, in the systems that we're developing or maintain and support, we'd never have an opportunity of getting people to use these terms. And there will be never any resources to come back and reapply them some later state. You know, like adding controlled vocabulary to things. I can't imagine that it will ever happen. Unless we could build some tools that are going to be provided to the people collecting data in the field in the first place.
So that's why I put that tool up there.
That ever happening.
What personally, I completely agree with you, and you've got only a few opportunities to get those kind of terms, and one of them is at the point of data collection, which is why we've tried to work with David in London with this EpiCollect tool, because it's more and more now people are taking, well, say 5 years ago, you would get like one of these brick things all coated in rubber, and it'd cost you like £10,000 to produce one, and you'd tap in some data and it'd be quite limited and you couldn't really change the data fields or anything like that. But now people are taking smartphones and tablets into the field with them. They cost $300–400. It doesn't matter too much if you drop one overboard, something like that. In the scheme of things, less so than £10,000. So that's a really important opportunity to have these kind of fields from ontologies populated into tools that you can literally just select when you're on a boat capturing that kind of information, or out in the African savannah, to be able to capture that. Surprisingly, actually, David does well, not surprisingly, but he does actually a lot of work with some groups in Kenya with doctors and capturing data in the field, because they have an excellent 3G network there for capturing data. So that's really important. But I will go on and show you an example.
One of the problems we have with controlled vocabulary is that people are collecting data are never going to read your definition. So they're going to use things they remember. So say I collected this fish in a bay. But their definition of bay might be completely different to your definition of bay.
So
if you say bay, what does it?
We have solved that problem within some quite difficult, rich communities. So the gene ontology is used by thousands of people, including people whose lives they get paid every day to use it to annotate literature. So the fact that there are going to be people who misuse it, it's a fact, but it's not a reason not to do it. On the contrary, it's a reason to do it right, which means give every term a definition, except the primitive terms at the very top.
The gene ontology is a little different, though. I mean,
Why do you say that?
well, because the numbers of cases that you have to work with so fewer. Like the annotating the gene and sort of.
So you
applying
would,
a control code
I will.
after
So it will be laptops at dawn. We will duel this out.
We build into our systems mechanisms for applying this, like a controlled vocabulary to a collection record. And of the 300 million, or how many billion they actually want, how many of them have ever been annotated after the fact? Like it's like zero. Not a single one of those records has had a controlled vocabulary applied after the fact.
So then you better get. So then you stop with this delaying tactic. You shouldn't be sitting here. You should be out building the controlled vocabularies that you need. You have a lot of work to do. So.
Yeah, I know. We did that, but I think with plants and soils would be important. So we have controlled vocabulary.
Well, the plant ontology is.
But you can't get people to apply it consistently.
But Greg, just as herbarium sheets are living records with their annotations, once we get the tools in place and make it easy for people to reference these shared vocabularies, I think it'll just happen incrementally.
So we've had
Maybe
those
the
kind of
legacy
tools
issues.
already for maybe 30, 50 years.
Well, people
You know,
do.
check-
People are
check
tagging
these
all the
pieces of
time,
paper,
every day. I mean,
terms
it's
written down, you know, like field books that,
but it's the fashion right now. All the younger researchers, they're tagging like crazy.
you know, tagging like crazy. Well, maybe.
I think the tool aspect is really important. Just imagine the World Wide Web without the tools to use it.
Yeah. So they're all learning how to do it, isn't it? There's no money yet to ever do it again. Okay.
Just have an implementation question. You mentioned EpiCollect. So how is, and that folks can choose, they're out in the field and they say they collected something, they say this is a marine benthic biome that I just collected. So EpiCollect, they choose that. Do they then store the URI for the marine benthic biome in a field?
Yep.
In EpiCollect. So I'm just comparing this, looking at the Darwin Core has the habitat field, which is just a literal string. You can type in marine benthic biome right now if you want in text, or you could choose the URI. I'm just curious here, you know, as a way to, and maybe this is something we address in the afternoon, procedural, how you disambiguate what is the URI with a literal string that goes in the habitat field for Darwin Core. Maybe we can make this is the habitat URI field, or how do you know, this is a transition question.
So there's two answers. Yes, you can either do it just as free text, and some point in the future you can do some kind of term mapping where you say, okay, this is what this guy's written as free text, and then map it to an ontology later on using some kind of text mining OCR lookup. Or you can actually get them to do it at the point of entry, where they're actually recording a direct link to an ontology. And you can use tools like Writefield, like Ontology Lookup Service, like tools that have these kind of features embedded in them, like the ISA infrastructure, which is Investigation Study Assay. These kind of tools help to do that kind of thing.
So embedding URIs in the existing terms.
Yeah.
But I guess my question then, you know, follow-up, does that break anything with Darwin Core or anything downstream, or our expectations that, you know, for its history, people are embedding text strings in it, and then all of a sudden people are going to start embedding URIs in there.
I think that's pretty defined within RDFS and OWL. You have data type properties and you have object properties. Object properties are pointers to other things, data type properties are text. And I think we shouldn't invent anything new. Just take this type definition and use it. I think it doesn't make sense in the sense of Barry to invent things which are already invented. Most probably we would need two fields. One is the text field and one is the pointer field. One is the data type property and one is the object property. Right.
And you can also make these tools, you know, ENVO is approximately 1,200 terms. GAS is 530,000 terms. So what you don't want to do is have a field in an Excel spreadsheet or in one of these data field collection terms that suddenly like opens up a 530,000 term tree for you to then go and pick a field that describes a particular environment from where you're taking this sample. You can do it, you can, as developers, you can give that tool to somebody to take into the field and say, you know, I know you're going into the Mediterranean on a boat. You're only going to need a subset of fields to capture from this particular branch of the ontology. You know, let's restrict it to that branch, and you can do that quite easily with tools such as EpiCollect.
It's also part of the architecture, at least how it's developed organically, that the higher up you go, the closer you go to the root, the more general the term is. I mean, I guess this is a feature of many hierarchical vocabularies. So if you're, again, you can choose sub-branches based on, number one, the expertise of the annotator or the observer, say. I mean, the more expertise you have in that environment, the deeper you can annotate. And then you can go up if you just need more general annotations, or if you suspect errors have been committed, or if something has been misused, or if a branch is unstable, you take it up to the next level. And this sort of an A is a B which C's definition structure helps you do that with more confidence, because you know that at least you can apply the lower resolution definition to things. This is how I use it when I'm looking at the genome collection.
So essentially, if the term you need is not there, it'd be ideal if you had the mechanism for suggesting it, but if not, go a level up kind of thing and do the next best thing that you can for somebody else to be able to find that data after you.
Another the principle is if you have an easy way that if people find gaps or errors, they can send a message to the developers. And that should be one of the principles that every ontology effort embraces.
So this is just an illustration of some, again, work that Pierre's been doing to define the terms as...
Just a caveat on this. This definition is put in there before Barry and I have begun work on refining the top levels. Eventually, the definition structure that is characteristic of BFO will then precipitate down to these definitions. For now, this is like the working definition from a domain user.
Okay. I'm not going to dwell on stuff. So I mentioned environmental materials as well. Oops. So these are the environmental material branch, and you've got stuff in there. So substances, stuff like dust, emulsion, foam, mud, oil, organic material. These are all things, again, as I said, they're count names, things that you could have a portion of. That's the rule of thumb that we've applied there. These are the environmental materials that that particular specimen or organism or bucket of soil would displace in order to exist. So if you took a bucket of benthic soil, you would describe that the environment it came from was more than likely a bucket of benthic, would be benthic soil. And Pierre's been doing a little bit of work on a new website that's going to come up shortly as well. We're just working on changing the domain name from the old web page where you can browse ENVO. This goes back to a point that you were making earlier about how do we see ENVO evolving as a community project that ideally we would like to see the branches of the hierarchy being controlled by domain experts in the field, and an editorial team consisting of nominated members from those different members of the field being able to get together at certain points, maybe 4 times a year, to discuss terms and you know, say do some rearrangement of branches, do the housekeeping, if you like. So that's the way that we would ideally like to see things moving forward. And I think DAG has also presented some nice methods as well that we might be able to work forward with like wiki-like structures for being able to manage the inclusion of terms and things like that, to be able to scrape them from there so that the community can have some direct involvement with participating and adding to things which they might find unwieldy to be able to contribute to, because ontologies are not easy things to be able to come and say, oh, I think this term should go there. It can be quite off-putting to do that. Okay. I'm going to just escape out of this a little bit again and go back to Greg asked for an example of how can these things be used. So we took this particular tool that we developed to just show how ontologies might be able to be used to the IEVO Bio conference, which Cindy is going to be running again this year. Where is it again, Cindy? Where's IEVO Bio this year? I'm plugging you.
Sometime in June, the end of June.
Ottawa. Okay, there we go.
July.
So we did this. Unfortunately, the boxes have gone a bit funny on it. But we took like a faceted browsing approach to being able to drill down and get hold of data records. We treated data records the same as you would products, the same as if you were to search for a TV on Amazon or something like that. You'd be able to select by screen size, by brand, things like that. So these are a number of different resources along the bottom here. We've got Camera, PubMed, and Genome's Online Database, Silver, and StrainInfo. StrainInfo is a collection of cultured collections of microbes distributed around the world. It might be that you want to drill down and find some particular microbes based on some particular criteria. And what we did was we took fields within these resources, such as habitat being, you know, a Darwin Core bag where you can add terms into, and indeed these terms have been filled up in these kind of resources. What we then did was we mapped the free text descriptions in these resources to the ontologies by doing some just text mining on it. So we had some kind of link between the ontology then and those particular records within those resources. So I can select, for example, bacteria, which will come up here in my search query. I can drill down as well through Eurasia, Europe, and I'm going to go down and select this is one I've prepared earlier. I'm going to select Scandinavian Peninsula, and you can see it's updating as well. The number of records for food is updated to 9, and there's 514 total records which conform to bacteria and Scandinavian Peninsula within strain info at the moment. So I'm going to go down to food and I'll select that one. I'm going to go down again and select dairy product. So it gets back 4 records now from strain info, which is a bit more manageable for us. If I look at the results of what's come back, I'll take this particular example. This, oh dear, go away. I've got this Laconostoc species, the habitat of which is Kefir, and I can't, where have I gone? It's gone off the screen a little bit because of screen resolution, unfortunately.
I'm not aware that the lactobacillus can produce milk.
Yeah, maybe, I have no idea. That's the way it's been annotated. So this Laconostoc species, its habitat was described as Kefir, and the country is Sweden in Gothenburg. So importantly, what's happening here is I've only selected Scandinavian Peninsula and dairy product. The ontology is classified such that Kefir is a type of dairy product, is a type of fermented dairy product, and it knows, because of the way the hierarchy is like that Sweden, Gothenburg, is located within the Scandinavian Peninsula as well. So that's some of the power that ontologies can give you in a very, very kind of crude sense. We're not doing any like proper reasoning or anything like that. This is just faceted browsing using ontologies. But the gold standard for us would be if all these particular data records were all done by hand to ontologies. We just did some text mining to match the terms within these data records to the ontologies, and often they're quite wrong. I mean, we get things like colon as a place annotated to colon, and you get a lot of these types of things. You get things like it happens a lot with geographical locations, because you get things like Dogleg Lake and things which are called something because they look something anatomically. So there's a big problem with text mining to be able to match these terms.
Did you think about the possibility to establish links to other sources like gazetteers, or like, for example, the UNIS habitat list of the EEA in Europe, or things like that?
So I forgot to mention actually as well, with the environment ontology, there's no reason why we can't subsume any other, I don't mean that as in like take it over, but I mean there's no reason why we can't have direct links or have synonyms with any other kind of habitat list like UNIS. Like within the biome list as well, we've taken Bailey's biome list, we've taken Udvardy's, and we've made direct links to those particular lists as well. And for this particular tool, there's no reason why I couldn't select any ontology and map the records to any particular ontology. It could be, of course, you know, I've showed things like foundational model of anatomy, but it could be any type of ontology, any kind of controlled hierarchical vocabulary. We've just exploited the fact that many of these ontologies are hierarchical.
So, Norman, what you just showed us was a term expansion based on your faceted browsing interface that then ultimately does a string match that you developed from text mining, annotations that were just string matches, right? Like something found milk and Uppsala in some article, and that matched a term expansion that was in your ontology, so you pull that in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was just literally a match between Uppsala and a record in that database, but there's no reason why it couldn't also do it to abstracts in papers, in PubMed, things like that as well. So you could drill down using the same faceted interface to get to records in publications and things like that in PubMed.